However, surprise, that's the theme of tonight's meeting, and so you can think of that as we will most likely all have a chance to speak, since our first speaker, Lloyd, filled in graciously to prime us with some ideas and maybe astound us with some inspiration as well.
When no one signed up to do a manual speech, it struck me, and then also Eric, that this would be a great time to talk a little bit about impromptu speaking. Now, we practice impromptu speaking in the form of our table topics, but if you think about it for a moment, impromptu speaking is the most realistic kind of speaking we do out in the real world. Literally, every time anybody asks you a question, you're given what amounts to a short impromptu speech. I think all of us know that there are some people who are really good at that, and you probably work with some of them. They can just somehow create a little, like almost a polished speech, make it sound like they've worked on it for days. And there are other people who aren't good at it at all. And that doesn't seem to be related to what they know. In other words, there are people who know a lot who aren't very good at expressing it, and people who don't know anything who make everybody think they do. In the best of all worlds, you would know something about whatever you're asked, and you would do a good job of expressing it. As it happens, Toastmasters has a little module on impromptu speaking, and that's what I'm going to base this on tonight. I'm going to do this quickly, and then Eric is going to launch table topics, and the idea is that you will all apply the astounding stuff that you have learned. But we'll see how that goes. I'm an old school teacher, so I know that I'm probably doomed to disappoint. Anyway, on the handout here, the handout is done so that if you get bored, you have something to doodle on. They give you 5 things to think about when you're doing an impromptu talk. Now, I mean impromptu in the widest sense, not just table topics here, but any kind of thing out in the real world where you might have to speak off the cuff for maybe just a few seconds, but maybe several minutes. You never know. The first thing is to listen. This is one that's surprisingly easy to overlook. You have to listen to whatever you're being asked, and it's very, very easy to misunderstand what someone is asking you for. And I bet you've all experienced that in the real world too, where somebody will answer a question that was not asked. And they sometimes do a very good job of it, but unfortunately it wasn't what they were asked to talk about at all. That makes you feel pretty stupid when you do that, to be frank. You know, sometimes you'll realize it later and you think, oh, you know, what they really wanted to know was whatever, and I didn't hear it, didn't think about it. So as they say in their little blurb here, a good response is dependent on an attentive attitude and careful listening, and that is definitely the truth. That is actually linked to number 2, which is pause. It's always a wise idea to, after you get asked a question or given a topic or whatever, to just pause for a second or 2 or 3 to think about it for a moment. Now, the problem with that is that we're all conditioned to think that when we're on the spot, when people are looking at us or you're in front of the room, you have to fill the air with words. You really don't. A second or 2 or 3 won't really matter that much. I mean, a second is just 1001. I mean, that's hardly any time at all. But if you pause to think a little bit, that can pay big, big dividends. Now, here's the trick. When you're asked a question, if your mind starts going, what am I going to say, 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 you're not going to have anything to say. Okay, I mean, you just won't, because you'll drive yourself into a panic, is what it amounts to. The trick is to not do that. It's to think instead, I'm going to say 3 things. And if you just, or any number to pick, depends on the time you have available, obviously. But if you say that, your brain will force itself to come up with something to say. It's just automatic. Your brain works that way. It does a lot of background type work that you're not conscious of. And so in that little pause, do something. In other words, just think to yourself, I'm going to talk about 3 things or 2 things or whatever. Number 3 is confirm. The way they describe that here, repeating or confirming the question out loud provides you with a clear idea of how to respond. And that's true. If you restate the question yourself, there again, you're conditioning your brain to think about it. Also, you're letting whoever asks you the question have the opportunity to say, no, that isn't really what I want. And that avoids the problem of talking about the wrong thing, if you think about it. It's not a bad little introductory thing too, you know. Now, no, I don't want to get into that, so I just won't. Number 4 is tell. This is actually the speech part where you say whatever it is you're going to say. As they say here, be enthusiastic, but stay focused and stick to the essentials. Do not give in to the urge to analyze every aspect of the topic. You know, typically, say if your manager walks up to you in the hallway and says, what do you think about whatever? He doesn't want a 10-minute speech. He just wants a few words. You know, and so you got to stick to the point, in other words, the main thing you want to say. And you better say that early on, because whoever is listening to you may only want to hear a little bit and then move on. And so if you have some kind of lengthy introductory remarks, you may never get a chance to get to the body or the point or the theme or whatever it is you were trying to get across. Then finally it says here, end. That's pretty self-explanatory, isn't it? Sure. Once you have said, well, once you have said what you want to say, don't belabor the point. In other words, say what you need to say and then stop. There's a tendency to ramble, especially if people are still looking at you. It's like, oh, they're not done listening, I better keep talking. That's probably not what they want. You know, they just want you to answer whatever the question was and then move on. Now that brings us to strategies, the middle one of these little slide things here. There are several of these that may or may not work depending on the circumstance. The key thing is that you can't have a strategy in advance of hearing the prompt, and that's because you don't know what the prompt is. In other words, if you say, okay, I'm gonna speak in chronological order, I'm gonna go, you know, past, present, future, and you get a question asking for your opinion about dogs, it's just not gonna work. So you have to hear the prompt first before you come up with a strategy. Number 1 is express an opinion. The reason that's number 1 is that it's actually the easiest one. Everybody's got opinions about everything. You might not think your opinions are very good, but remember 2 things. People listening to you don't know that. You know, they might think you actually do know something. And so let them think that, if that's what they want to think. But the second thing is that it's easy to come up with an opinion. Now, when you have an opinion, though, it's a good idea to also have something to back it up. That's where that little Oreo method of doing table topics works really well, where you say what your opinion is, the O. You give out some reason for having that opinion, that's the R. You give some evidence or an example to back up your reason, that's the E. Oh, and then the O. The O is to restate the opinion again, which gives you a little conclusion. It makes it seem more polished. And that sometimes works pretty well. Cause and effect is an effective thing for, especially in the real world, you know, where somebody says, wow, you know, we tried something or other and it didn't work. Why do you think that is? Well, you can talk about causes and effects that way. Breaking the topic into components. What they mean by that is if it has components, you can divide it into those and then speak about each one of them in turn. It seems to me that would only work for a relatively long speech, not a little minute or 2. The 4th one there is not a number, the 4th diamond, discuss past, present, future, really is a good one to do. You know, assuming the topic can more or less fit that. Because you can give a little bit of background, talk about what the current situation is, and then explain what you think should be done in the future about it. The 3rd slide here are kind of general things. Whatever you do, first of all, be confident. Most people really do believe you have something to say, especially if they walk up to you and ask a question. I'm talking the real world. You know, if you think about it for a moment, like say your manager comes up and asks you a question in the hallway, well, he's probably not going to do that if he thinks you're an idiot. I mean, really, why would he? He'd ask somebody who knows. He wouldn't ask you if he didn't think you probably knew. So you have an advantage. You have some credibility in advance. So you should take advantage of that. Be confident. Also, if you are confident, most people will believe you know what you're talking about, whether you do or not. And you know that from being probably fooled many, many times in your life by somebody who has seemed really confident. Oh yeah, you know, such and such is true, and then you find out later it's not. You know, well, they either believed it or they wanted you to believe they believed it, one of the two. But the point is, be confident. If you are confident, you're probably going to do fine. You'll also be more comfortable with the idea of pausing every now and then if you're confident. If you're not confident, you kind of want to chain together words as rapidly as possible and escape, and that makes you sound like you don't know what you're talking about. Number 2, be brief. That one's important, especially in impromptu text speaking. You've only got a limited amount of time, so say what you got to say and then stop saying it. People will actually be happy if you don't keep talking. Finally, be sincere. I would say be sincere even if you have to fake it. The point, now, this doesn't necessarily mean sincere like, you know, I want to adopt you or something. It means sincere in the sense of seeming to know what you're doing, you know, being honest, in other words. It says here, now, this is something that will sound a little odd. Trying to be inventive when you don't know the answer to a question can be risky. It's better if you just admit you don't know how to respond. Now, in the real world, that's obviously the truth. You know, especially in a work setting, it can be very risky to claim you know something that you really don't in terms of the job. In table topics, of course, we're always told no matter what, you have to come up with something to say, so you should go ahead and be inventive. There is a risk in that. In my opinion, it's better to actually respond to the topic you're given in table topics rather than talk about something else, which is something we do all the time. I know the rationale for talking about anything at all, that is to, you know, make people stand up and have something to say even if they don't really have something to say. But it's better practice for real life if you actually respond to the question that you're given. You know, there again at work, if your boss asks you a question, you're not going to get away with saying, well, you know, I don't want to talk about that, so my favorite meal for Thanksgiving is on the other hand, if you sound crazy enough, people will leave you alone. Most people are somewhat frightened of people who seem insane. So, you know, if you're gonna diverge from the topic, go all out. Don't be moderate about it at all, and just look confident, and everybody will think you know what you're doing. That's actually kind of the summary of this, I guess, is to just, you have to be willing to adapt. You have to be willing to go with the flow. But it's very, very important that if I had to point it to one thing in this that you don't want to forget, is that number 2 in the top one. Just pause for a moment when you hear the topic. Give it a little bit of thought. Just a couple, 2 or 3 seconds can sometimes make all the difference depending on what's going on in your head. And that's what I meant earlier. If you say, what am I going to say, what am I going to say, what am I going to say, that 2 or 3 seconds won't matter. You have to tell yourself, I'm going to do 3 things, and you'll come up with it. It's almost magical to see it happen. Are there any questions? Yes,
I just have a comment, Lloyd. I just thought of it. The table topics timing does not actually start until the person begins speaking. So you do have your 2 or 3 seconds
Sure.
to think before the timer is started.
But most of us don't take them. You know, in other
Yes.
words, as soon as Eric finishes telling you what the prompt is, most people just start writing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, or they'll say some filler type thing like, well, that's an interesting question, or I don't really know what to say, or something like that, as opposed to an actual speech thing. But yeah, you're right. If you just stand there for a second or 2 or 3 or 4, everybody will just wait. I mean, nobody will think you're doing something wrong, but there's this overwhelming feeling that you need to fill up the air with words while you're standing up here. You really don't.
So we have off cameras.
Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Thank you all very much.